Hey everybody, it's Walter White here for Detroit Lions Podcast. We are, I knocked and I came in and I'm taking over this week for the Week 7 matchup for the Detroit Lions on the road against Dallas. Kind of crazy, but stay tuned, it's coming right at you. Okay, so the whole Walter White thing is I feel awful for my wife and my children having to look at this. It's not great. And the fact that that I'm going as Walter White on Halloween, I'm literally doing nothing, is not great at all. All right, let's move on. Let's get into this. Okay, so numbers. The game total is set at 48. Now remember, I'm recording this Thursday morning, so this information comes before Dak Prescott gets declared. You know, as he's playing, I'm assuming he's going to play. So I'm assuming all of these numbers are going to get pushed up. So game total is 48. Dallas is favored by 7 at home. The implied numbers: Dallas is 27.5. Detroit is 20.5. I would expect the game total to get into the 50-51 range. I would expect Dallas to be favored by 8.5 in the end. And the implied numbers will have Dallas around 29.5, and Detroit around 20 and 21.5 range. They kind of correlate together. If Dallas is scoring more, the Lions will have to score more at the same time. So, okay, team stats. On offense, let's get into the numbers. The Detroit Lions rush offense. They're number 2 in the NFL, averaging 5.4 yards per carry. The Lions have 7 rushing touchdowns on the season, which is tied for 8th in the NFL, but they've played one fewer game than almost anybody. So on an average, from an average touchdowns per game standpoint, they're probably in the top 5. Dallas is tied for 13th, averaging 4.4 yards per carry, and tied for 18th with 4 total rushing touchdowns. So now, passing offense. The Detroit Lions are tied for number 11 with 7.3 yards per attempt. Dallas is number 30, averaging 6.2 yards per attempt. Some of that is the Cooper Rush factor. Some of it is that the Dallas is just, they're not as explosive on offense as you would think this team could be through 6 games. Obviously, Cooper Rush playing for 5 of them sort of caps their offense. But and then passing touchdowns, the Lions are tied for number 5 in the NFL with 11 touchdowns. Same thing. I didn't check out the averages, but they're actually a little better per game than that 5th category or that 5th rank. Dallas is number 26 with 4 passing touchdowns. So that's where they are on offense. On defense, run defense, the Detroit Lions are number 30 in the NFL, surrendering 5.5 yards per carry. They have surrendered 10 touchdowns rushing, which is number 31, and my guess is if we average that out, they would be last in the NFL with the 10 rushing touchdowns allowed through 5 games. Dallas is tied for 15th with allowing 4.4 yards per carry. So they're a middle-of-the-pack rush defense. They do stiffen. They're they're tied for 2nd in the NFL, giving up 2 total rushing touchdowns through the 6 games they've played. So we've hit offense, we've hit defense. There's one stat that kind of sums this whole thing up for me, and why I feel like this. I don't want it to, because we have to. There's no reason to be like, nobody wants to tune in to hear me drone on about why this is such a rough matchup and how it's just going to be impossible for him to win this game. But there is a stat that's pretty telling, that's alarming, and where I think the nuts and bolts of this entire matchup goes. It's the Detroit Lions have generated 7 sacks in 5 games, number 32 in the NFL. Last I looked. Great with the numbers, I guess. Dallas is number 1. They've generated 24 sacks through 6 games. So you can see where, and we'll get into this in the offensive breakdown, but you can see where there is a very likely game script in which the Lions are forced to play catch up in this game, or are forced to throw in situations where it's third and long kind of stuff, where Dallas can pin their ears back, and that's been tough for just about everybody. Philly did an okay job last week, but with the escapability of Jalen Hurts, it makes it tough to get him to the ground, as we saw early in the season. So again, we'll get into this in the offensive side of things, but it's a little. This is where the Lions are in trouble. Is if they put themselves in position to have Jared Goff exposed to pressure, and then we see the happy feet and the uncomfortable Jared Goff, which is very much not a great thing. Dealing with pressure and all of that. So on offense, this is kind of where we're just going to break down what the Lions can do on offense to try to slow down. And the Lions have been explosive at points. Getting a player like DeAndre Swift back will be very helpful from a big play standpoint. He practiced in a limited fashion on Wednesday. As I mentioned, these guys, I'll tell you whether they practiced or not, and how that's relevant to what's happening, to what I'm talking about. But so best case scenario, and it's very simple, is that the Lions can run the ball to some level of effectiveness and put themselves in a situation where even if they do have to throw, it's short. They get the ball out quick. Jared Goff remains comfortable in rhythm, on time, in tempo, all those things. But if they get into situations where they can't run the ball, where they run for a few yards, or it's whatever it is, if it's 3rd and 6, 7, 8 range or longer, that's trouble for the Lions. So you want to stay out of bad down and distance. And I think I've said that every single breakdown, and I will continue to, because it's kind of the nuts and bolts of it all, right? What I would do, and something I would look long and hard at here, is I would run the ball in a power way. So the Lions run a lot of power, which are gap concepts, and it's just heavy, real heavy. I would run as heavy as I can directly at Micah Parsons the entire game. And obviously, you can't, the majority of the game, right? It's not reasonable to say wherever he's at, we're going to run the ball right at him. But as a principle standpoint, run the ball at him and make him pony up, make him play big boy football, make him shed guards, make him take on big guys, make him play super physical football and slow him down. Period. Run at him. That's the way I would do it. Now, let me preface it by telling you a little story. So, I work on again, I'm not equating what I do to anything at the level of anything more than high school football, but I work with an offensive line locally where I live, and involved in that. And there was a game, an important game we played a little while back, where I was convinced that if we just ran the ball, exactly what I just said, at one of the players on the other team, I'm not going to mention the team, I'm not going to do it, but I was convinced that he wouldn't hold up, and that we would have success running directly at him, because I just didn't think he would hold up. And I was wrong, very wrong. In fact, not only did he hold up, but he absolutely crushed our game plan, and we had to go away from it at halftime. So just because I think it's a great idea to run at Micah Parsons doesn't mean that it's going to work. It's more complicated than just running directly at him, because there's other players involved. And I'm just trying to explain it, like, just because I think it might be a good idea doesn't mean it is, and it doesn't mean that it's going to work out that way, because I know that I've thought that in the past, and it didn't work on the level that I'm dealing with it at. So, and it's significantly more complicated with what they do in the college and specifically at the NFL level. Having given my little, this is what's happened in the past when I thought I saw something kind of thing. I do think the idea of making him handle, pulling guards and tight ends and all that stuff, it can tire him out, and it can slow him down a touch. It's just you don't want him, coming off the edge clean, just ready to roll. You want it to be an exhausting game for him. So that's one of the things that I hope the Lions do is just take pressure and take a heavy approach to how they handle blocking Micah Parsons and getting him just slowed down. But it's not just Parsons. Dorrance Armstrong's playing really well. I think he has 4 sacks. Parsons has 6. DeMarcus Lawrence has 3. So it's not just Parsons, but because they move Parsons around, I think it would be a real smart idea, in theory and in practice, to be able to run it right at him. Now, again, I've told you before that I was completely off by Rocker, in a game we played a while back. So we'll see how it goes. But I mean, in theory, that's kind of it. It's run at him, make him play a very long day's worth of football. So, I do think, I mentioned Swift maybe coming back. He's got ankle and shoulder issues. Amon-Ra St. Brown, I hope, is fully recovered from the ankle, because he's such a huge part of that quick passing game, where the Lions can avoid some of these pressures just because of how quickly they can get the ball out. DJ Chark is not practicing yet, and that injury that sparked a couple weeks ago that was so concerning to me looks more concerning now than it did then. That long-term injury to his foot, ankle, looks to be something that I feared. That was, a couple weeks ago when he popped up on the injury report, it was, the radar went off, like, uh-oh. So here we are a couple weeks later, and he's still not practicing. It's not a great sign. Josh Reynolds did not practice yesterday. Taylor Decker did not practice yesterday. That's a personal reason. Apparently his wife was pregnant, and in the process of they're having a baby. So, that's where that is. So Matt Nelson, swing tackle, did not practice. So that's where they are on offense. So, no Chark, no Josh Reynolds. We'll see how the Josh Reynolds thing plays out as the week evolves. I would not expect Chark to play. So you can understand why it's so important to get Amon-Ra back in the lineup. Frank Ragnow was was a limited participant in practice with the foot. I would expect him to play. So, I mean, this is the offense. You're not going to set Jared Goff back in the pocket and ask him to take 5-step drops and just hang back there and deal with pressure and avoid, like Jalen Hurts did this a little bit in last week's matchup with Dallas, is just avoid the edge pressure and make things happen, either running or throwing. That's not Goff's game. You can't ask him to sit back there and just hang in the pocket forever. The Lions are smart. I don't expect them to do that, but you have to stay in this game. They're going to have to run the ball effectively, get themselves into good down and distance, and make some explosive plays, either from the running game or in the screen game. I just can't see them sitting back, hanging out, Goff a bit out to dry, and just letting plays take a long time to unravel, and them holding up with what Dallas has up front. I just don't think that's going to happen. So, as simple as this feels, it is realistically, can the Lions run the ball effectively to move the chains? Interestingly, that slows down Dallas's offense because they don't have the ball. We'll see how the Lions play on Sunday. I fear that they're not able to do what I'm talking about, which is to slow Dallas's defensive front down through their running game, which puts them in a very poor situation with their quarterback, with Goff, and we've seen Goff. I mean, Goff has played really well this year. The reason why they're losing games is absolutely not on Goff at all. And as historically, the last couple of years, I've wanted the Lions to do just about everything they could to move away from Goff. But there also needs to be recognition for people like me who want that, to understand that the Lions have a pretty explosive offense, and one of the reasons is because Goff has played really well. It's just not his particular strength to deal with pressure well. Okay, so that's kind of where the offensive breakdown is. I feel like I could talk a lot more, but I'm just going to be repeating these things over and over again. The Lions need to scheme up some interesting concepts, some counters, some pulls, just things that they can do to extend drives safely. Safely meaning running the ball or getting the ball out quickly. So on defense, Dak returning, how does that impact what Dallas has been doing and where the Lions are on defense? And I've thought for a while that I think it goes back to before the ankle injury that he suffered last year, that he didn't look right with his shoulder. He missed time during their training camp with a shoulder injury, and he rehabbed it. But there are moments when the ball comes out, even last year when he, before the ankle injury, where you could see the ball kind of flutter as it comes out. And I just wonder, is he fully over whatever happened with his shoulder, arm, lat, trap, whatever was involved in what was limiting him in training camp not this year, but 2 years ago. So all that to say is, I don't know how effective Dak is going to be back in week one. Coming off the thumb injury, he didn't play great in week one against Tampa in their 19-3 loss against Tampa. It's a really interesting question. What happens for them on offense? You would think against the Lions that they would be very productive on offense, and I know that Vegas thinks they're going to score 4 touchdowns. The Lions have not done a great job stopping the run, so you would think that Zeke would have the potential to have a good game in this matchup. You would think that Tony Pollard would make some very big plays happen in this game. I think it's reasonable to think that. CeeDee Lamb might have a monster game this week, but I do find it interesting that if you look at the players that Okudah has limited to this point in the season, the one player he had a real hard time against was DK Metcalf, and I'm sorry, Metcalf is not a player that Okudah should be walking to the line of scrimmage and pressing. It's just not realistic for Jeff Okudah to press and physically bully DK Metcalf at the line of scrimmage. It's just not. But do I think he can do it to Lamb? Yeah, I do. It's just a matter of where does Lamb line up, and do they move him around? Do they move him into the slot to get clean releases? We'll see how it matches up. I kind of hope Okudah does travel with CeeDee Lamb. Jerry Jacobs coming back, and I think he'll be back this week. I hope. Cross your fingers. Will be a huge. It could be a very impactful return for the Detroit Lions defense. Noah Brown, who's playing out of the slot mainly or he's listed as their slot receiver. He's been pretty effective. Michael Gallup is a good receiver, so they do have weapons. It's just Lamb is the scariest one, and is there a scenario out there where Jeff Okudah can pretty much do to him what he did to Justin Jefferson, which is refuse to allow him to cleanly get off the line of scrimmage into his release? And if he can, then that takes away a huge weapon. But then we haven't talked about Dalton Schultz yet. Jake Ferguson, the tight end problem for the Lions. Dalton Schultz, if he plays and everything lines up for him, he could have a big game here. So it's something to pay attention to. Is Dallas's weapons are not just receivers, Dalton Schultz is a very, very effective player and a player that Dak has targeted a lot in the past. So that kind of answers a little bit of Dak returning. I think Dallas could look a little rusty. They could look a little out of rhythm early. Can the Lions keep them out of rhythm and out of sorts? That's a good question. I don't know that the Lions will be able to do that over 4 quarters, but I don't think it's a matter of Dak returning means that the Dallas gets back to this, high-powered, high-octane offense and blows the doors off the Lions. I don't think it's necessarily that. I just think over time they'll get there. It may take a little bit for Dak to get back into rhythm. So that's kind of the matchups for where they are on defense. I think I want to say that a player like John Kaminsky returning, he practiced in a limited fashion Wednesday with the wrist injury. I think that's a big deal for the Lions' defensive line. Charles Harris is still not practicing. I don't expect him to play. Ifeatu Melifonwu did not practice on Wednesday. That's a bummer. I want to see him take a step as a safety or in some way in the back end of that defense. I really, we need to see him take a step and emerge as something that's hopeful going forward. Again, the defensive matchup is similar. The Lions have struggled to get home. The Lions have struggled for their pressure to get home and make plays. While Dak is mobile, he's not Jalen Hurts mobile. So I think that there are pressures to be had there. There are plays to be made for their defensive line. It's just, we talked about this 2 weeks ago, and then I did a little video on what you can do to unlock a player like Aiden Hutchinson. It still applies. It just feels like they need to give him the keys to make him more comfortable and stop burying him inside. And that's what I mean by the return of John Kaminsky might help because that's Kaminsky. That's where you play him. You play him inside. That's his game. And that kind of tends to, in theory, would tend to loosen things up a little for Hutchinson. And I think we've seen, not enough, but we've seen some examples, a small sample size of what Kaminsky and Hutchinson have looked like on the same side of the ball together, and that's it's looked good. It has. We have not talked about Josh Pascal. I know that there's people gnashing their teeth about that pick. I loved that pick when they made it. I thought Josh Pascal was Trayvon Walker light in this draft, meaning he was a player who could line up, who was big enough to line up inside, quick and athletic enough to play outside, but was a really, really effective player against the run while being surprisingly athletic and powerful to get after the quarterback. And to me, he just screams football player. Hutchinson does too, but Pascal did things a little differently. And if Pascal returns and I think it's going to take him time with the core injury, it always does. But I'm really, really excited to see what he can bring and what he looks like and what he can deliver for them. They really need help setting, in their run defense, setting a very firm edge and essentially forcing the ball carrier to go back inside to where all your teammates are and not allowing runners to bounce outside. And Pascal does that. Pascal has very heavy hands. Like I said, he is a football player. I'm very, very excited to see him, and I hope we see a little bit this week. I don't know that we will, but I hope we do. But back to the point, getting Kaminsky back, I think, does help Aiden Hutchinson, and with Prescott not being really, really crazy fleet of foot, I mean, he's going to extend plays, but the Lions can track him down. They'll be able to run him down a little bit. So that's kind of like where it is the Lions need to be able to generate more pressure than they have, and they need to do a better job of defending the run than they have, which sounds ridiculous because they've been a very bad defense. So it's very obvious that that's what they need to do. I think they can. I don't think it's going to be great at all times, and I think Dallas will have big plays on offense, and I think the Lions will struggle to get off the field at times. But I think there's reason to be a little optimistic for what's returning and what it might look like in the longer term. It's just like I said, some of this stuff, this is not a great matchup for where the Lions' weakness is on offense and for where they are on defense, which is kind of struggling all over the place. But the hopeful side is you get Jerry Jacobs returning, you get Kaminsky returning, you get Pascal in there in some fashion, and things sort of loosen up for them. And to be honest, I don't know if anybody golfs or plays a sport like that, but for me, if I golf with the same people I normally golf with, I'm gonna make terrible shots. But every once in a while, I'm gonna pull something out, and just because I'm loose, I'm gonna make a good shot, and that's just kind of the way I play golf. But if I played with people I've never played with before, I carry so much muscle tension that you wouldn't believe what it looks like. Like, it's dangerous. To me, it looks like the Lions on defense are carrying a lot of muscle tension as they play, and they just need to play looser and faster. That's what it looks like. So I hope. Sometimes you just need something to go right in the early part of a game to just play faster and looser. That would be something I would hope happens for the Lions this week because they very much need it in this matchup. And again, I'm not trying to make this sound like it's an impossible task for them to go down to Dallas and win a game there. It is. It's a tough task. They can do it. They're explosive enough on offense, and if they play a great game on defense and Dallas looks a little bit out of rhythm because Dak hasn't played in 5 weeks, there's a glimmer of light there. But this is a tough matchup. It's going to be a tough game. But I've kind of given you some of the things that I'm looking for that make me intrigued to see what this looks like. Something to talk about is some of the self-inflicted things that are going on with the Lions and the drafting of what they've done. Essentially what Brad Holmes has done in the second round. And even, I guess at this point, you could even throw Jameson Williams in the mix. Now, I'm going to talk about Jameson Williams first. In a similar fashion as to the DJ Chark comment from a couple of weeks ago, and how that comment sort of set the radar off a little, Dan Campbell made a comment 2 days ago about Jameson Williams that perked up my attention, not necessarily in a bad way, because I think I had unrealistically set my expectations too high for Williams. Meaning, I thought Williams would be getting close to being back by now. Or in that range, like week 6, 7, 8 range. I thought he'd be back. So when Campbell comes out and says something to the effect of, he's turned a corner in the last month, and I expect him to be back some point this year, I think to myself, I thought he was going to be back by now. Now, this could be something as simple as the Lions are just playing the long game with this. But, and I have nothing to go. I don't think that there's been a setback or anything, but it just seems like this is taking more time than I wanted it to, which might be a me problem. So, for whatever it's worth, I don't think there's anything, I don't think there's anything up with Jameson Williams the way I thought there was with Chark. But, maybe the Lions have just taken a very conservative approach with Jameson Williams, and the expectation all along should have been we'll see him in week 12 or 13 kind of thing. Just something to monitor, something to think about going forward. But a lot of this is about Levi Onwuzurike, who the Lions essentially put on IR for the season. He had back surgery. He was their second-round pick last year. I liked the pick. Full disclosure, I liked the pick. I understood it. Just because they do need a disruptive interior presence. They absolutely do, and they need it more now than they ever have. Back surgery is a killer. He's got a long way to go to get back, but it doesn't mean he can't. It just, it sounds like they did everything in their power to avoid surgery for him. I don't know what kind of surgery he had. There were some rumblings about fusion. That's a lot. That's a different kind of a surgery and a more constraining surgery than just like a discectomy, kind of laminectomy type of thing where they're just pulling out pieces of bone and disc tissue. This would be something that would harm and potentially damage his flexibility and strength going forward. That doesn't mean he can't play in the NFL. None of that. It doesn't mean that. It just means this is a bigger surgery than if it is a fusion. I don't know. Again, more things to pay attention to. So you have Levi, you have Jameson Williams, who they moved up to draft knowing he was injured. They knew Levi was injured when they drafted him. They knew Pascal was injured when they drafted him. All that tells me is that the Lions are playing, the Lions and Brad Holmes are playing the long game with these guys, and it frustrates us that they're not taking players who aren't injured. They're taking players who they know that they are injured and are dealing with things and unfortunately have had setbacks, and it's just a bummer how it's worked. Very clearly, these are talented players. I think if Pascal doesn't have core muscle problems in the draft, he's a bottom third of the first round player. Jameson Williams to me I would have considered him the wide receiver 1 in this class with no ACL injury. Levi went where I thought he was going to go when he got drafted. I think his issues, there were times when he would stand straight up and it was pad level and that kind of stuff, but it was very disruptive out in the Pac-12. So, that's, I understand the frustration. I get it. I think there's reason to be frustrated about these things, but the hope is that Pascal gets healthy and gets recovered and plays to the level I think he can, and everybody will then slow their roll a little bit on the complaining and bitching about. I don't mean it. I shouldn't have said that. The complaining and upset about drafting a player who was already injured, who suffered a setback, and you should have seen it coming. He's a very talented player who I think it'll be worth it in the end. Jameson Williams, same thing. I think he is just such a freaky fast player, and it doesn't mean that they have to use him as a vertical threat. You run him on drags and crossers, and just look at what Jalen Waddle does in Miami and what Tyreek Hill does in Miami, and there you go. So just wanted to address that a little bit because I understand the frustration. I do get it, and I do think that it's warranted. The frustration is warranted, but we have to have a longer-term outlook than these guys should have been recovered by now and being productive to this point. Let's give it just a little time for Pascal to get on the field to see what he looks like and what he can do. And I promise, Jameson will be worth it. He's that good. So that's kind of it this week. We'll be back. We'll hit the post game with some thoughts on what some of these guys who did return look like, and I hope we have good news to report on the other side of this weekend as far as how they looked, whether it's a win or a loss, just how they looked, how they played, how they competed, all those things, and what they looked like. Because going into the bye, they looked a little bit unraveled and disheveled, and it's not something that was a great look for Dan Campbell and company going into the bye. So let's see what they look like coming out of the bye. That's the pregame Lions for Lions on the road against Dallas for Week 7. We'll see you guys next week. Have a great weekend.